President von der Leyen, Secretary General Ban, Mayor Bakogyanis, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends. Καλησπέρα σας και καλώς ορίσατε σε αυτόν τον ναό πολιτισμού και δημοκρατίας. Welcome to this temple of democracy and culture. It has really been my privilege for the past 10 years to welcome you at the Athens Democracy Forum, a gathering among these hallowed columns of the city, where rule by the people was first tried. The forum was hosted then by the International Herald Tribune, which subsequently became the International New York Times. And I'm happy to say that the partnership is continuing very strongly, and it's now organized, even the bell approves, and now organized by the Democracy and Culture Foundation. A free press remains a critical pillar of democracy. And democracy, as well as the free press, needs help. Since we first gathered here 10 years ago, democracy and the press have been battered by the malign forces of authoritarianism, fake news, tribalism, bitter economic and political divisions, and disease. And now the once unimaginable has descended on us, an all-out war in Europe. Vladimir Putin's cruel and destructive invasion of Ukraine on a set of concocted pretexts is something I confess we could not have imagined when we first met here. The war has spread far beyond its borders, and many of us, and democracy as well, will be shivering this winter as a result. Does that mean that this forum has been gathering in vain? That democracy is failing? I don't believe so. Democracy is really not an isolated fortress that once breached falls to a mob. Being here, it is an idea, a way of life, a faith that requires constant renewal and struggle. The Democracy and Culture Foundation is here to help democracy evolve. Just in the same way, Madam President, I believe that the EU's Conference for the Future of Europe does, and we are honored to have President von der Leyen with us today, and we look forward to hearing your vision on our shared goals for democracy. Our ultimate, and I believe mutual, goal is better governance, and our basic belief is that you cannot have good governance without citizen engagement. Hence our focus on deliberative democracy in a way that it addresses the distrust of citizens, but at the same time instructs governments on the merits of participatory tools. So by listening to what our speakers tell us every year, our foundation, just 2 years old now, embarked on a series of roundtables this year. In Sydney with New Democracy Foundation, Seoul with Taipei Academy, Washington with Bertelsmann Foundation, Berlin with Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Tel Aviv with IDEA and Sapienship, and ended up in London with EBRD, where we synthesized the results, the outcomes. And yesterday, all these 6 cities came here to Athens and presented some of the practical reforms we need to support. Let me mention just 2 of them. Perhaps we should be establishing a 4th branch of government, composed of ordinary citizens selected by sortition. We are at the ancient agora, after all. Perhaps upper houses becoming citizens' chambers. A second one is citizens' assembly to design a process defining and labeling disinformation across search engines and social media. Our chief diplomatic correspondent, Stephen Erlanger, will moderate a panel on rethinking media after President von der Leyen's keynote. But these are just two very practical policy recommendations that our Building Blocks of Democracy project has come up with, and there's more, as we strive to stay true to the do part of our strategic impact chain at the Foundation, which is think, talk, and do. We need to do things, not just talk, and all or part of this requires maybe even constitutional change, which is bold and ambitious, I know, but essential if the evolution and perhaps revolution of democracy is taken seriously. That really is our task here at the Athens Democracy Forum. We know what's wrong. What we need to do is tighten our togas and come up with real, actionable ideas for the future. In a way, we are advocating a return to Athenian democracy, a modern agora, if you like, and by mastering technology to be our ally, we can be even more successful than the ancient Greeks. I would like to thank all our speakers this evening, but also over the 5 days of this forum. I mean, how this forum has grown from the 2 hours that we were here 10 years ago is unbelievable. I would also like to thank our headline sponsors, Meta and Taiji Academy, our gold sponsors, Luminate and Microsoft, and so many others like the Gruen Institute, EBRD, the Council of Europe, and many more that you see on the screens. And we are delighted that we have just been awarded a grant by the EU Horizons Orbis project to put some of our projects into action. Gosh, there are so many people I really need to thank, and I can't do it, but I just want to highlight some of them. Olga Kefalogianni, you're the person that opened the ancient agora to us. Mayor Kaminis, you came to New York 2 times to save this conference and keep it here in Athens. Alexis Papachelas and Nikos Kostandaras, you came up with the name Democracy Under Pressure. Simeon Tsomokos, you opened so many doors. Alberto Cano, you did so much. Roger Cohen and the entire New York Times team have been behind this for 10 years and even now as an independent entity. So many people to thank. But Mayor Bakogyanis, you are the current custodian of this wonderful city, and you and the city of Athens remain faithful stakeholders of this endeavor, as do the United Nations Democracy Fund, enabled by Kofi Annan, whose foundation is with us today and a stakeholder, and we have a message from Nada Al-Nashif, the United Nations Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights. It is Athenian democracy, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to regalvanize, and that is what this forum's heart beats to. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and we will hear now from Nada Al-Nashif.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to join this event. Since its inception in 2012, the Forum has become a major venue to reflect on the challenges facing democratic values worldwide. In these complex times, such discussions on how to preserve democratic gains and pursue the enjoyment of human rights for all are even more critical. 10 years after the initial Athens Democracy Forum was convened, a glance through the state of the world today reveals a grim picture. Just as we thought we were slowly emerging from a global health pandemic, the war in Ukraine, with its tragic human suffering and global socioeconomic repercussions, reminds us once again how fragile progress in human rights protection, peace, and development can be. The pandemic has shown us the consequences of long-standing gaps in human rights protection, discrimination and inequalities, and their disproportionate impact on the most vulnerable. It has also compounded political, social, and economic crises, undermining years of progress towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and compromising economic, social, and cultural rights. from health and food to housing, water and sanitation, education, and decent work. The global food, fuel, and financial crises are threatening to plunge millions in poverty. According to the World Bank, between 75 and 95 million additional people could be living in extreme poverty in 2022 compared to pre-COVID-19 projections. While governments around the world have adopted unprecedented and often necessary measures to respond to the pandemic, they have sometimes gone beyond what is necessary and proportionate to safeguard public health. Space for civic action has been shrinking, with repression of peaceful assembly and of expression and threats to dissenting voices, including in the digital space. Polarization, both within and between countries, also continues to grow, undermining global solidarity, weakening multilateralism and the international legal order, with devastating consequences for human rights protection. Democratic gains of the last 30 years have been greatly eroded. In 2021, the level of democracy enjoyed globally by the average person was down to 1989 levels. Last year, almost a third of the global population lived under authoritarian rule, and the number of countries leaning to authoritarianism is 3 times that of those leaning to democracy, a trend common to all regions. In this context, our office has repeatedly called on all states to protect civil and political rights, including the rights to peaceful assembly, essential to a functioning democracy. You will deliberate what went wrong over the next few days and examine how we got here. Allow me to suggest a few contributing factors. First, I believe that growing discrimination against women, minorities, older persons, and others historically marginalized, and the inequalities deriving from structural discrimination have widened the gap between people and institutions, threatening the foundations of any democratic system. Second, the curtailment of public participation and lack of transparency in public decision-making, with diminished accountability of government officials, has also led to entrenched political disenchantment, with negative implications for people's effective engagement. Third, decreasing trust in institutions has provided fertile ground for populism, with political leaders using the current political, economic, and security volatility as an excuse to impose restrictions on political freedoms. Collectively, we should strive to reverse the worrying trend of shrinking civic space and to rebuild trust in institutions by strengthening inclusive public dialogue and equal participation. Democratic institutions themselves need to be strengthened, whether electoral commissions or high courts, local government structures, national human rights institutions, and anti-corruption entities, including by increasing their independence and transparency. In his flagship report, Our Common Agenda, the Secretary General sets out a powerful vision for the role of multilateral governance in tackling contemporary challenges. The agenda begins with a call for a renewed social contract anchored in human rights to fight inequalities and exclusion, promote social justice, and preserve the space for the full exercise of civil and political rights. I am convinced that the program of the Forum, with the rich expertise of the participants and this uniquely inspiring setting, will ensure fruitful interactions. Good luck with your discussions.
The City of Athens, ladies and gentlemen, is the other stakeholder of the Athens Democracy Forum, so it gives me pleasure to invite Mayor Kostas Bakogyanis of Athens.
Madam President, it's a true privilege to welcome you to Athens. I know that I'm expressing all Athenians when I thank you for your leadership, especially at this critical time. Mr. Secretary General, your historical journey is one of inspiration. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Athens Democracy Forum is marking its 10th anniversary this year. But as Achilles observed a few days ago, while the Forum can celebrate, democracy cannot. Indeed, the dark forces of authoritarianism and division have struck at the heart of our continent with an unlawful invasion. We owe our moral and our practical support to all brave Ukrainians, men and women, young and old, who defy, resist, and heroically stand against barbarism on the front line. In this spirit, I'm proud to report the city of Athens last night bestowed the Athens Democracy Award to President Zelensky as a symbol of Ukrainian heroism. At the same time, however, we owe ourselves to commit to the home front. This is, after all, unfortunately, shaping up to be the winter of our discontent. And all predictions are sobering. High energy prices, triggered by supply disruptions, could result in a long, cold, unjust, and expensive winter for millions of people around the globe and in Europe, as energy poverty reaches unprecedented levels. Now, this is a time for European solidarity. It is, after all, a European problem that requires a European solution. And as we watch from afar, white smoke seems to be appearing in the skies of Brussels. The proposed windfall levy applied to surplus profits is clearly a step in the right direction. And we still hold hope that the calls of 15 countries, our own Greece amongst them, will not be defied, and that legislation for a price cap on gas imports will be proposed. Or alternatively, that another path leading to a similar result will be chosen, and we will move forward with common purchases. In any case, I think we can all agree that this, ladies and gentlemen, is not the time for bidding wars or fruitless competitions, but for cooperation and partnership. Now, of course, truth is that for this year, much that could have been done quickly, has been done, from installing LNG terminals to reanimating old plants. But we must be frank. This is not a one-winter problem. We will get through this crisis. We will get through this winter. But we must prepare for the next one. There is no back to normal. And we have a long and a hard road ahead in tackling the energy crisis in Europe. It is a climate crisis, but it is also a national security crisis, a challenge to our sovereignty. And in response, we need to, as the cliché goes, think global, act local, or in our case, think European and act local. And I dare say, without hopefully sounding too self-serving, that the role of cities and local authorities is rather critical. Let's not forget that urban centers are actually responsible for 70% of CO2 emissions. Now, there is good news. There's good news. Cities like Athens have already led by example and put our money where our mouth is. Our targets are much more ambitious than national efforts. But there is also bad news. We have lost precious time and have counted on cheap energy from Russia to facilitate our green transition. We could have been more proactive in the past. So we need to act now in two directions. On the one hand, end energy dependence, and on the other, green transition. So at the same time, we want to accelerate renewables deployment and, yes, save energy. But a quick note, if I may, this cannot be accomplished with us issuing edicts. It has not worked in the past, and it will not work now. Rather than waving our finger, we should be giving our hand. No matter what we do, the most important thing is to take the people with us. This is, after all, a time of unity, of transcending parties, ideologies, and egos. And we need synergies between all levels of government to foster implementation rather than brave new commitments. So top-down, we need coordination, we need financing tools, including, I should say, direct financing for cities, especially for for those colleagues of mine who are not as fortunate as I am in Athens, colleagues who are held hostage by illiberal national governments. And here I'm thinking, for example, of my friends in Budapest or Warsaw, but also bottom-up, self-reliance and self-sufficiency. And one more thing, since COP27 is around the corner, this cannot be an excuse or an alibi for backtracking when it comes to our climate targets. Ladies and gentlemen, it may surprise you that I spoke about the energy crisis in a democracy forum. But you know what? It was a conscious choice. It's not only that in defending our home from Putin's weaponization of energy, we are defending for democratic values. It runs much deeper than that. Many of us mayors around Europe are working towards fair and inclusive cities, cities that support the most vulnerable amongst us and leave no one behind. It's an ambitious, admittedly, but worthwhile goal. And unsustainable energy and living costs are quite literally mines in the road ahead, mines that can blow up our efforts. Now, in full disclosure, we are no strangers to energy poverty in our urban centers, and the pandemic has worsened inequalities, but not on this scale, never on this scale. Today, we are at serious risk of exacerbating poverty and inequality by limiting access to the most vulnerable to lighting, cooling, refrigeration, clean cooking, and heating. Families should not have to choose between food and paying for their energy bills. Democracy is on the line. And I'm reminded of Yeats, who proclaimed in another dramatic European era that the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. The battles between democracy and autocracy wages beyond, but also within our borders. The apologists of authoritarianism speak with no shame, forgetting that in its worst day, democracy is much better than the best day of the dystopias they defend. It is the very beauty, the absolute majesty of democracy, that it gives time and it gives space even to those who threaten it, endanger it, or wish to overthrow it. Look at the re-election results in France, in Sweden, hard-won battles. And did I mention Italy? And Italy? And Italy? We cannot afford to lose any more precious time. If not now, then when? Many thanks, and once again, welcome to Athens.